Before we dive into this epic tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us for more thrilling sci-fi adventures. The land stretched out endlessly before him, a cracked and broken wasteland under a heavy, blood-red sun. The air was thin, sharp against his lungs, and every breath felt like it scraped through his chest. Jack trudged forward, the crunch of his boots against the brittle ground the only sound for miles. Dust devils twisted like ghostly figures in the distance, vanishing almost as quickly as they appeared. He adjusted the strap of his battered satchel across his shoulder and wiped the sweat from his brow, though it did little to ease the burning heat that pressed against him like an invisible hand. The silence out here was unnatural, oppressive, a silence that didn't just exist but seemed to reach into a man's soul and squeeze. It reminded him too much of the day he lost her. His sister, small and bright, swallowed by the woods near their home on Earth, leaving behind only the echo of her laughter and the hollow, aching pit in his chest that had never fully healed. Jack had spent weeks searching, hoping, bargaining with the universe. The day he gave up was the day part of him had died. Since then, he hadn't believed in miracles. Still, out here among the dead stars and forgotten planets, he found himself looking, always looking for something. Maybe redemption. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe he was just too stubborn to quit. The wind shifted, carrying with it a sound so faint he almost thought he imagined it. He froze, every muscle going rigid. There it was again, a thin, desperate cry, almost lost to the breeze. His heart hammered once against his ribs, a deep, instinctive thud of alarm. He scanned the jagged horizon. Nothing moved. His mind raced, cataloging possibilities. An animal? A broken machine? Or worse, a trap? He should walk away. That was the smart move. No one survived long out here by playing hero. Yet Jack found his boots moving without permission, steering him toward the sound. The weight of old guilt pressed down on him, and for a heartbeat he saw a flash of blonde hair, heard a giggle that no longer existed. He clenched his fists and kept moving. The cries grew louder, more urgent, tinged with a raw terror that twisted his gut into knots. They came from a narrow canyon, the rock faces steep and jagged, shadows pooling like black oil between them. Jack paused at the edge, peering down. At first, he saw nothing but darkness, the kind that seemed to swallow light whole. Then, a shimmer, a flash of color that didn't belong. His breath caught. Half buried among crumbling stones and narrow fissures was a figure, small and slight, trapped in a crack barely wide enough for a body to fit. The figure squirmed weakly, one arm pinned awkwardly above her head, her legs wedged tight between unyielding stone. Her skin was not human, it shimmered faintly, a pale blue that seemed almost translucent in the dying light. Her hair, tangled and matted, floated like threads of silver spiderwebs in the breeze. She wasn't human. But she was alive. And terrified. Jack's pulse thundered in his ears. Every instinct screamed at him to be cautious. There were things in the galaxy far worse than death. Yet the raw fear etched into the way her free hand clawed feebly at the ground, the broken sobs that tore from her throat. They weren't a trap. They were real. They were the same sounds his sister must have made, alone and scared in the woods all those years ago. He dropped his satchel and scrambled down the steep incline, stones shifting treacherously beneath him. Dirt and dust filled his mouth and eyes, but he didn't stop. He slid the last few feet on his knees, reaching out to steady himself against the jagged rock. Closer now, he could see the injuries. Her exposed skin was torn and bleeding, the cuts shallow but numerous. Her breathing was fast and shallow, each gasp a visible tremor through her slender frame. Her wide, glassy eyes locked onto his, full of a terror so raw it carved into his chest like a knife. Jack raised his hands slowly, palms open, speaking in soft, steady tones even though he knew she wouldn't understand the words. It didn't matter. Tone mattered. Presence mattered. He was not a threat. She whimpered, trying again to pull herself free, but the movement only made her cry out in pain. Jack winced, heart twisting. The crack was tight, cruelly so, and the rock around her was splintered, suggesting a fall. She must have slipped and gotten wedged, unable to free herself, left to die alone in this dead place. Not today! Jack wouldn't let another innocent slip away. He edged closer, careful not to startle her, his mind already working through possibilities. He had a rope, but the angle was bad. He had no leverage here. Digging would risk bringing the canyon wall down on both of them. His gut churned. Every second counted. She was weakening fast. A low, broken moan drifted up from the darkness below the crack. Jack stiffened, skin crawling. He strained to listen, but the sound faded into the silence again, leaving only the racing of his own heart in his ears. Whatever was down there, it wasn't friendly. And it wasn't alone. He pushed the fear down. There was only the girl, the rock, and him. That was all he would allow himself to focus on. Jack reached into his satchel and pulled out a length of reinforced fiber line, whispering nonsense words to keep her calm. He threaded the line carefully around the part of her body he could reach, gently working it beneath her arms without jostling her trapped legs. Her skin was cold against his fingers, trembling violently. He felt her muscles spasm with every touch, the strength draining from her with terrifying speed. She was small, heartbreakingly light. A child, almost. He tied a careful knot, tightening it just enough to hold without causing pain. Then he braced his legs against the canyon wall, wrapped the line around his waist for extra leverage, and prepared to pull. He glanced down into her terrified eyes, gave what he hoped was a reassuring nod, and pulled with everything he had. Her body shifted slightly, a dry scraping sound rising from the rock. She gasped, a sound halfway between a sob and a scream. Jack gritted his teeth and heaved again, feeling the fiber line dig into his palms, feeling the stubborn resistance of the stone against her. He would not fail her. Not today! Not ever again. The rope strained against Jack's waist, every fiber in his body screaming with the effort. Inch by inch, the alien girl shifted upward, her body scraping harshly against the jagged edges of the narrow crack. Blood smeared the stone, her fragile form trembling in agony. Jack dug his boots deeper into the loose gravel, muscles shaking, breath burning his throat with each heave. He refused to let go. There was too much riding on this. Failure wasn't an option. Not when he could feel her slipping closer to unconsciousness with every second that passed. She gasped, her tiny hands clawing weakly at the air as if searching for something solid to hold on to. Jack grunted, ignoring the searing pain in his arms, forcing another surge of strength through his limbs. The crack finally gave a sickening lurch, a pop of stone grinding against stone, and she slid free with a wrenching cry. Jack stumbled back, catching her awkwardly in his arms as they collapsed together onto the dust-choked ground. Her body was terrifyingly light, brittle almost, as if she might shatter from a rough touch. He wrapped her in the battered emergency blanket from his satchel, shielding her delicate skin from the punishing wind. Her breathing was shallow and rattling, her eyes fluttering closed and open in short, panicked bursts. Jack whispered to her, a soft stream of words that neither of them truly understood but both somehow needed. The important thing was the sound, the presence, the assurance that she wasn't alone anymore. The low moaning sound echoed again, louder this time. Jack stiffened, instincts firing sharp warnings through his mind. Whatever lurked below hadn't forgotten them. It was moving closer, climbing, searching. He felt the tremors under the soles of his boots, subtle but undeniable. They didn't have time to rest. If he stayed here, they would both be dead before nightfall. Carefully, he lifted her into his arms. She whimpered but didn't resist, too weak to do more than shiver against his chest. He secured the blanket tighter around her and began the brutal climb back up the canyon's steep edge, every step a battle against gravity, loose rocks sliding underfoot. He couldn't afford to fall. He couldn't afford even a moment's hesitation. He pushed himself beyond the screaming protests of his muscles, driven by a grim, unwavering determination. Reaching the top, Jack allowed himself one precious second to breathe before setting off across the wasteland. The land stretched out endlessly in every direction, no cover, no shelter, no clear path forward. His only choice was to move, to keep moving, and pray he found something, anything, that would give them a fighting chance. The sun dipped lower, bleeding crimson across the sky. Shadows grew long and deep, and with them came a cold that bit to the bone. The temperature dropped so fast it felt like walking through a door into winter. Jack tightened his grip on the girl, sharing what little body heat he had left, shielding her from the worst of the chill. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, clouded with pain and fear, then closed again as she nestled closer against him. Trust, tentative and fragile, but trust nonetheless. Behind them, distant but unmistakable, came the sound of something scraping against the rocks, something too big, too heavy to be natural. Jack didn't look back. There was no point. He knew better than to waste energy on fear he couldn't afford. Survival demanded focus. Survival demanded belief. Each step became a silent promise. I won't let you die. I won't let myself fail again. Hours seemed to stretch into an endless, punishing march. Jack's legs moved on pure willpower now, fueled by a stubbornness that had kept him alive through wars, loss, and years of exile. His vision blurred at the edges, his mind teetering on the brink of exhaustion. But giving up meant death, and he had nothing left to give to death. A faint glimmer on the horizon snapped him back from the edge. It was faint, almost a hallucination, but as he staggered closer, it sharpened into something real, a ship, half buried under dust and debris, its once bright hull now scarred and battered by time. Hope flared in Jack's chest, sharp and painful. If the systems weren't completely dead, there might be shelter, maybe even a working transmitter. He half ran, half stumbled the last few yards, the girl still cradled against him. The ship's entry hatch was partially ajar, the internal lights flickering weakly. Jack squeezed through the gap, feeling the stale, recycled air hit him like a damp cloth. Inside was chaos, broken panels, hanging wires, the lingering smell of burnt circuits, but it was shelter. It was enough. He laid her gently on a relatively clean stretch of floor, propping her head on his bundled jacket. Her breathing remained shallow but steady, and that was a victory he clung to with desperate hands. Jack moved quickly, scavenging supplies from the wreckage, finding a working medkit, and setting to work cleaning her wounds as best he could. Every cut, every bruise told a story of struggle, of a life so far removed from safety it made his chest ache. She bore them without protest, her body too drained to even flinch. As he wrapped the worst of the injuries, his hands trembling from cold and fatigue, Jack found himself murmuring again, promises woven into nonsense words. He told her she was safe now. That he would get her home, wherever that was. That he wouldn't let the dark things claim her. The ship's lights dimmed further, a sign the power reserves were dying. Jack worked by the faint glow of his wrist beacon, keeping one hand always near the old blaster tucked into his belt. He knew they weren't safe yet. Whatever hunted them hadn't stopped. It would find them sooner or later. The thought gnawed at him, but for now, he focused only on her. Her life was in his hands, and he would not fail her like he failed before. Outside, the wind howled through the broken landscape, carrying with it faint, unearthly cries that prickled every hair on his body. Jack sat with his back to the wall, the girl sheltered in the crook of his arm, blaster across his lap. Exhaustion pulled at him like a black tide, but he forced himself to stay awake, to listen, to watch. Somewhere beyond the broken walls, the nightmare still hunted. But inside this battered metal shell, Jack would make his stand. For her. For the promises he couldn't afford to break again. He tightened his grip on the blaster, listening to the rhythm of her breathing, steady and fragile as a bird's wing against his side. Against all odds, they were alive. And as long as they drew breath, they would fight to stay that way. Jack woke to the sound of metal groaning under unseen pressure, a low vibration that set every nerve in his body on edge. His hand tightened around the blaster before his eyes even opened fully. His body protested every movement, but he forced himself upright, surveying the dim interior of the wrecked ship. The girl was still asleep, her face pale and pinched with pain, but her breathing was stronger now, more even. It was a small mercy, but a crucial one. A new sound reached him then, soft at first, like whispering voices slithering through the cracks in the hull. Jack knew it wasn't imagination. Something was out there, circling, probing. He crept silently toward the main console, his heart hammering against his ribs. A quick check of the ship's systems revealed the worst. Communications were dead, propulsion was a memory, and life support would fail within hours. They were trapped. He scavenged what supplies he could carry: a cracked canteen half full of stale water, a few nutrient bars, a nearly spent power cell, and returned to the girl's side. She stirred at his touch, eyes fluttering open, pupils dilated with confusion and fear. Jack knelt beside her, speaking in a low, steady voice, explaining through gestures and broken words that they needed to move again. She understood, though terror flickered in her gaze. She was smart. She knew the danger was growing. Jack fashioned a crude sling to carry her, securing her weight against his back so he could move with both hands free. She clung to him, trembling but silent, her trust in him now absolute. He kicked open the battered hatch and stepped back into the wasteland, the cold slicing through his worn clothes like knives. The horizon was a jagged line of rock and dust, no clear path to safety, but Jack moved forward without hesitation. Hesitation was death. Hours passed in a grim blur. Jack navigated ravines, scaled crumbling ridges, waded through choking clouds of dust that tore at his throat. The girl whimpered against his back but didn't complain. She was a survivor, just like him. That knowledge gave him strength he didn't know he still had. When his legs threatened to give out, when every step felt like dragging a mountain, he thought of the way her hand had clutched his jacket in her sleep, the way her eyes had begged him not to leave her behind. The sky darkened to a bruised purple, and Jack knew night was coming fast. With night came worse dangers. He found a shallow depression in the rocks and dropped into it, shielding them from the worst of the wind. He tucked the girl beneath his battered coat, wrapping himself around her to block the cold. His mind raced with plans, possibilities, none of them good. They needed a signal, something to attract attention, but without working tech, they were invisible. The whispering sounds grew louder after sunset, closer now, crawling across the broken ground. Jack tightened his grip on the blaster. The girl buried her face against his chest, her body trembling violently. He whispered to her, words he barely understood himself, promises he couldn't be sure he could keep. But she believed him. He could feel it in the way her breathing slowed, the way her shaking lessened. That belief was a burden heavier than any wound, but it also lit a fire in him that would not die. In the darkest hour of the night, he spotted a flicker of light on the horizon. Not the malevolent shimmer of the things hunting them, but a steady, purposeful glow. Hope surged within him, sharp and almost painful. It could be a patrol, a rescue team, maybe even settlers who had survived the collapse. Whoever it was, they represented a chance. Jack shifted the girl more securely onto his back and began moving toward the light. Every step was agony, his muscles screaming, his lungs raw. But he moved, driven by the memory of old promises and new ones born in the wasteland. He moved because stopping was no longer an option. As he drew closer, the shape of a small settlement emerged, hidden in the shadow of a cliff. Makeshift barricades ringed it, and crude floodlights illuminated the area with harsh white beams. Figures moved behind the walls, human figures, armed and alert. Relief flooded Jack's body so fast it made him dizzy. They had made it. He staggered the last few yards, lifting one hand in a shaky wave. Voices shouted from the wall, and a moment later, the gate creaked open. Guns remained trained on him as he stumbled inside, but he didn't care. He dropped to his knees, lowering the girl carefully onto the ground, shielding her body with his own. The settlers surrounded them, faces wary but curious. Jack forced himself to speak, his voice a ragged croak. He explained as best he could, gesturing to the girl, emphasizing her need for help. Slowly, the guns lowered. A woman stepped forward, her face lined with weariness but softened with compassion. She knelt beside the girl, checking her injuries with practiced hands. Jack watched, every muscle tight with tension, until the woman looked up and gave a single nod. They would help her. They would save her. The weight on his chest lessened slightly, though the exhaustion still pressed hard enough to blur the edges of his vision. The settlers helped him to his feet and led him toward a small building near the center of the settlement. Warmth hit him like a wall as he stepped inside, the blessed smell of food and clean water filling his senses. They eased the girl onto a cot, covering her with a Rio blanket. A man pressed a mug of steaming liquid into Jack's hands, and he drank without thinking, the warmth spreading through his frozen limbs. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jack allowed himself to believe that they might survive this. The girl was safe, at least for now. He sat beside her cot, one hand resting lightly on hers, and let the bone-deep weariness pull him under. He didn't notice the settlers exchanging wary glances, didn't hear the murmured words about outsiders bringing trouble. All he knew was that for tonight they were safe. And tomorrow, he would face whatever came next. Because some promises, once made, could never be broken. Not by time. Not by fear. Not even by death. The hours passed slowly, with the distant hum of the settlement's small machines providing a faint comfort to Jack. He couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped in a dream, like everything around him was too calm, too quiet. As the night deepened, so did his thoughts, swirling back to the girl. She had stopped trembling. Her breathing had steadied, and her body temperature seemed to be normalizing. But there was still something in the back of his mind, a gnawing unease he couldn't explain. He sat there beside her cot, watching her chest rise and fall with every breath. She was alien, yet in that moment, she felt like one of his own, and that strange connection unnerved him. He didn't know her name, didn't understand her language, but they had both come from the same desperate place. And now they were in the hands of strangers who might be their salvation, or perhaps their doom. Jack had seen it all in his years as a soldier in the depths of space. The worst didn't always show itself right away. The door creaked open, and a tall man entered, his face hardened by years of survival in a wasteland of broken promises. He looked at Jack, then at the girl, his gaze lingering for a moment too long, as if weighing something Jack couldn't read. The man's eyes flickered with something almost like recognition. Jack felt a sharp pang, a tug of memory, but he couldn't place it. "She's not one of ours," the man said gruffly. It wasn't a question, but a statement. Jack didn't respond right away, unsure how to answer. The man clearly wasn't asking about the girl's origin in any general sense. No, this was about something deeper, something that made Jack's skin crawl with the sudden awareness of how little they really knew about what they were dealing with. "You're right," Jack said quietly, his voice hoarse. "She's not one of us." He paused. "I don't know what she is. She's different." The man eyed him, his arms crossed over his chest, before lowering his voice to a near whisper. "Where did you find her?" Jack hesitated. The memory of the wreckage, the cold, the desert-like wasteland they had crossed, all came flooding back. "It wasn't a crash," he said slowly. "At least, not in the way you'd think. She was trapped. She wasn't part of the wreck, she was caught inside it. I don't know how or why, but she was in pain. She was in danger. And I couldn't leave her there." The man studied him for a moment longer, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded, as though Jack's answer had satisfied something deep within him. "Stay close to her," he said, his voice low but urgent. "If she's what I think she is, it's best you don't let anyone else see her." Jack frowned, not fully understanding the warning. But something in the man's tone sent a chill down his spine. The man turned and walked out, leaving Jack alone again with his thoughts. The rest of the night passed in uneasy silence. Jack didn't sleep. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, the girl's face would flash before him, her alien features, the quiet pain that had crossed her expression as she clung to him. He could still feel the weight of her body against his, still hear her silent cries. There was something wrong, something about her that tugged at the edges of his mind, and he couldn't figure out what it was. By morning, the girl had awoken, her eyes clearer, though there was a trace of fear still lingering in her gaze. Jack offered her a small smile, though it didn't come easily. She didn't smile back. Instead, she looked at him with the same quiet intensity as before, as if studying him, trying to understand who he was. For a moment, he wondered if he was the one who didn't understand her. She wasn't just some stranded alien from a far-off world. She had been there for a reason. She had been caught, trapped, in that wreckage, and now she was here. But why? What did it all mean? Jack had no answers, only questions, and they gnawed at him as much as his exhaustion. The man who had spoken to him earlier reappeared around midday, his face grim. He motioned for Jack to follow him outside. Jack hesitated but obeyed, stepping into the sunlight, which was harsh on his skin after so much time indoors. The man led him to a small, makeshift command center, a collection of battered computers and old tech cobbled together by the survivors. They hadn't been able to make contact with the larger colonies, but they'd managed to survive by scavenging, piecing together the remnants of the world before the collapse. The man pointed to a screen. "We intercepted something last night," he said, his voice tense. "It's not just a wreck. There's something off about it. There's a signal buried in the data. A kind of beacon." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He stepped closer to the screen, squinting at the lines of data scrolling across it. The signal was faint, but it was there. A pattern, repeating at intervals. It wasn't random. It wasn't just an accident. Someone, or something, was sending a message. The man turned to Jack, his eyes dark with suspicion. "I don't know if you know what you've gotten yourself into, but this isn't a simple rescue. That girl isn't just stranded. She's the key to something bigger." Jack swallowed hard. "Bigger than what?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man hesitated before answering. "Bigger than us all." Jack's pulse quickened, his mind racing. Everything was starting to fall into place, but the pieces didn't make sense. Why had the girl been alone? What had she been trapped inside? And why did this stranger, this survivor, look at her like she was the answer to something that could change everything? "Who is she?" Jack asked, his voice low but urgent. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied Jack, his eyes narrowing. "I think it's time you found out." The girl's presence in the small outpost was more than just an anomaly. It was a catalyst that seemed to unravel everything Jack thought he understood about the world around him. Her silence spoke volumes, each breath she took a testament to the quiet terror that had been etched into her very being. But it wasn't just her physical presence that unnerved Jack. It was the growing realization that she wasn't simply another lost survivor from a distant galaxy. No, there was something else about her, something far more dangerous. The man who had first warned Jack to stay close to her wasn't the only one who felt it. As the hours passed, more and more of the survivors came to see her, some curious, others cautious, a few even afraid. It was clear to Jack that not everyone on this ragged outpost was as welcoming as they had initially seemed. The fear in their eyes wasn't just about an alien presence, it was something deeper, something primal. At first, Jack tried to ignore it, focusing on the girl. Her strange eyes, too large for her face, seemed to hold a depth that he couldn't understand. When she looked at him, it wasn't with the curiosity he had expected from someone stranded in a foreign place. Instead, it was more like she was sizing him up, trying to measure him against some unknown scale. The way she moved, the way she held herself, it was as though she was constantly calculating, analyzing every action around her with a calm that felt far too deliberate. But as days passed, that same sense of unease started creeping into Jack's own thoughts. It wasn't just the other's fear, it was his own. He couldn't help but notice how the mood on the outposts began to shift. Whispers began to circulate about the girl, about the strange things they had seen since her arrival. People had heard things at night, scratching sounds coming from the storage areas, whispers in a language no one could understand, and shadows that seemed to move on their own. Jack's own paranoia began to take root. He would wake up in the middle of the night, his skin prickling with the sensation of being watched. The air around him would feel colder, though no one else seemed to notice. His dreams were filled with images of the girl, her eyes, glowing faintly in the dark, her expression always unreadable. He would wake, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, unsure if the things he had seen were real or just figments of his imagination. It was during one of these nights, when the sense of dread was at its peak, that the first incident occurred. The girl was nowhere to be found when Jack went to check on her. Panic flared up inside him as he searched the small outpost, moving through the dimly lit hallways with a growing sense of dread. Something was wrong. The outpost was too quiet, the usual hum of machines and the soft murmurs of the survivors replaced by an eerie stillness that seemed to cling to the walls. It wasn't until he reached the lower levels that he found her, standing alone in a dark corridor, her body rigid, as though she was in a trance. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, stared ahead at nothing, and her breath came in shallow gasps. Jack called out to her, but she didn't respond. He reached out to touch her shoulder, but the moment his fingers made contact with her skin, a jolt of electricity surged through him. His muscles seized up, and for a brief moment, the world spun out of control. He pulled his hand back, heart hammering in his chest. The girl's eyes snapped to him, and in that instant, Jack saw something in her gaze, something alien, something cold and calculating. It wasn't the innocence of a lost soul. It was the stare of a predator, a creature far beyond human understanding, and the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just a survivor. She wasn't just trapped in an unfamiliar world. She had a purpose here, and that purpose wasn't to be saved. Jack stumbled backward, his mind racing to make sense of what was happening. But before he could process any of it, a voice echoed through the halls, a voice that was unmistakably human but also distorted, wrong somehow. It was the voice of the man who had first warned Jack to stay close to her. But this time, his tone was different. It was low, urgent, as though he had been waiting for something to happen, something that was now unfolding before them. The man's figure appeared at the end of the corridor, his face twisted in a grimace of terror. "Get away from her!" he shouted, his voice raw with panic. "She's not what you think she is. None of us are safe with her here." Jack's heart skipped a beat. The man's words hit him like a jolt of electricity, and for the first time since the girl had arrived, the full scope of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't just about one girl, one alien. This was something much bigger, something that was beyond the scope of anything he had ever encountered. The man rushed forward, grabbing Jack by the arm and pulling him away from the girl. "You don't understand," he said, his voice barely a whisper now. "She's been sent here. She's part of something far more dangerous than you can imagine." Jack stared at the man, trying to piece together the fragments of what he was saying. The girl, she wasn't just lost. She had been sent here, deliberately. But by who? And for what purpose? The questions swirled in his mind like a storm, each one more terrifying than the last. Before Jack could say anything, the ground beneath them trembled. The outpost shook with a violent force, and the lights flickered overhead. The walls seemed to groan as though they were alive, shifting and contracting. The sound of metal scraping against metal filled the air, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, the tremors stopped. The man released Jack's arm and turned to face the girl, his eyes filled with something Jack couldn't quite read. "She's a weapon," the man said, his voice breaking. "A weapon meant to bring about the end. And we've just triggered it." Jack's blood ran cold as the realization hit him. The girl wasn't a victim. She was the harbinger of something far worse, and now that she had been awakened, there was no turning back. What had seemed like a simple rescue mission was now a fight for survival against an enemy that was far more deadly than anything they had faced before. And the worst part was, Jack had no idea how to stop it.